I know this is not the video that anybody was expecting to be posted because I literally just said that I was getting ready to do the Why Everybody Hates Christopher Hayden video. That video is taking me a lot longer to do than expected, which was not something I anticipated. So in the meantime, I hope you guys will enjoy this video and the next one, which is also a long awaited video, but I don't want to give too much away. This video is wrapping up us talking about Emily Gilmore in season 4. I thought this would be a great way to discuss people pleasing since that's the central theme in these episodes. So without further ado, let's begin. TV. Yes, I made a theme song so that I can talk about all my favorite shows. Oh yeah. And this is just your disclaimer that this is not me talking about any of the actors themselves, but more so their characters. Please do not attack me in the comments. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion, even those who disagree with me. But let's keep it friendly. All right, let's get started with the show. In episode 16, Emily announces her friend Sweetie has died and Richard opts out of going with Emily to her funeral. Gran passes away from a heart attack. Richard expresses his regret about his last encounter with Gran. What happens with Gran passing away is truly unfortunate because it is the definition of what people who care about their parents but are emotionally abused by their parents fear. It is what sometimes causes a person who's in a situation with someone in a position of power to keep being mistreated because they're flooded by thoughts of, well, what if something happens to them? They start thinking maybe it's okay to endure the treatment because I don't want the one time I stand up to them to be the last time I ever speak to them. It's a dangerous mindset that keeps victims trapped. This scene between Lorelai and Richard also gives us more insight on how Richard views the parent-child relationship. Richard feels that Lorelai is forever in debt to him because of the sacrifices he made as a parent, and he feels the same way about himself. While parents do sacrifice a great deal to raise their children, I personally feel that this is simply just parenthood. This is not to say that the parent should allow endless amounts of disrespect, but that when you sign up to become a parent, sacrifice is a major part in the role. I've said this before, but children don't owe their parents simply for being children and needing things that children need to survive. Your child does not owe you anything in return for you doing things that you were supposed to do anyway, that you were obligated to do, because otherwise you'd be in jail. Why does it make sense to some people that they can choose to have a child and then hold the child responsible for needing to be taken care of? And then in contrast, more people find it easier to understand that when they get a pet, that pet will need to be taken care of, and therefore choose not to get a pet. But when it comes to having children, people can't uphold that same ideology. Like, it's strange. This episode allows us to approach the topic of people pleasing. As I mentioned before in previous videos, I was once a people pleaser. I didn't identify with that label for a long time because I always felt like, well, I'm not a people pleaser because I don't people please in this area or this one, or I'm very honest in this area. I was focused more on the times in my life where I wasn't people pleasing, and something all those times had in common was that I was comfortable. For some, it's easier to slip into people pleasing, especially in Black communities or communities of color. The reason I say that is not to say that white communities do not also experience this, but I think that's an important discussion to have, speaking with the knowledge that from a young age, girls in these communities are taught to people please for their survival. And this transcends into people pleasing as an adult in situations that seem to demand it. But what's also interesting is that despite its intention, people pleasing is counterproductive. What I've learned about people pleasing is that once you undo it and start setting boundaries, you quickly realize just how much the people you did it for didn't actually like you. You realize that they just took pleasure in how available you were to them. They stopped seeing you as a person and more so as an opportunity. People pleasing doesn't actually make anyone like you because the people who don't even notice that you're overextending yourself often don't value you or know you outside of how to use you for their own personal gain. Being silent when someone is taking advantage of your kindness only hurts you, and you trick yourself into thinking that you're keeping the peace, but the more you let someone abuse your kindness and devalue your time, the more they will get comfortable doing it. And soon you'll notice how much more a question just becomes a statement. It's no longer, are you free? It's now the assumption that your time is their time, and God forbid you say no. Once you regain the power in your no, someone who's grown accustomed to you being a people pleaser and doesn't value you might turn on you. I feel like people do not talk about that enough, but it's like you quickly become too difficult, you're too aggressive, you're mean, you're stuck up, not a person with feelings in a life of your own. Eventually you'll realize that you'll just keep saying yes, and the one time you really can't do it and have to stand firm on your no, none of your previous efforts will hold any weight. We see this in the episode with everyone involved. Even after Grant's endless resume of charity work, she was underappreciated in her own obituary. Richard spoke up for himself against her, and it instantly erased any of the good times that he'd had with his mother. Emily bent over backwards, trying not to offend Grant despite her feelings being hurt in the process, and it never made Grant think that she was good enough for Richard. And by the end of the episode, on one hand, it's great
great that Richard chose to bury Graham with his father, but then on the other hand, it's like, it's just surreal to me that even after all Emily dealt with, it took her death to make Richard truly take a stand against his mother, other than when they had their last fight. In episode 18, Floyd, Jason's dad, shows up on the golf course attempting to set up a dinner between him, Jason, his wife, Richard, and Emily. It falls on the same day as Friday night dinner, so Lorelai's there. Jason and Richard both take it as a symbol that Jason's dad wants peace. But then Floyd announces that he's suing Richard and reveals that Lorelai and Jason are dating. This episode reveals a lot once again about the world of Emily and Richard. Floyd and Richard are not that different. Floyd presented himself as jovial and innocent at the dinner, just as Richard presented himself as loyal to Jason. But the moment Richard feared that he'd lose his lifestyle or his reputation, he abandoned any loyalty he had to Jason. It's also clear that Jason views his dad's attempt to sue him as a sign that his dad is taking him seriously, which is odd, but again, it's an insight onto how their world works. Jason's dad cares more about punishing Jason and maintaining his pride than anything else. In episode 19, Jason spends a good portion of this episode trying to figure out what's happened with him and Richard is avoiding Jason. Richard doesn't even confront Jason himself. He has his lawyer contact Jason to tell him he's going back to working for Jason's dad. I actually felt bad for Jason because he came from an honest place. Like, he really wanted to tell Richard that he was dating his daughter, and he wanted to keep everything 100% like honest with him the whole time. And it's like one little wrong move, and not only has he lost his business, he's lost like any chance of being able to work, period, because his reputation is ruined, because that's what their life and their world is built off of. Lorelai goes to the Gilmores to discuss why Richard backstabbed Jason. The scene between Lorelai and Richard is truly heartbreaking because Lorelai is basically begging Richard to not backstab Jason because, for one, it's wrong, and because it's going to affect her happiness, and Richard expects Lorelai to care more about him and Emily when, let's face it, they're not her safe space. I don't understand parents that can be so horrible to their children and expect that just because they're their parents, they're owed some kind of loyalty that they haven't put in the work to have, other than doing the bare minimum. Whether Jason and Lorelai are dating or not, Richard was wrong for betraying him. What reason other than financially have Lorelai's parents given her to uphold them over someone who makes her genuinely happy? In what world does it make sense to choose people that criticize you, demean you, and flat out bully you for your shortcomings and for your differences over someone who genuinely just accepts you as you are? Richard doesn't even consider how his choices will affect his daughter, but he expects his daughter to consider him? It doesn't make sense. He cares so much about materials and his reputation that he tells his own child to move away just so that he can do the wrong thing in peace. Not to mention, he lied to Emily. He doesn't even consider that Emily might want Lorelai to stay close, and that Lorelai might actually consider moving away just to be with Jason, which would affect Emily. As Lorelai and Roy are waiting for the next Friday night dinner, you can see Lorelai is feeling very anxious, and it seems like Richard and Emily have forgotten that they were supposed to have Friday night dinner. There's clearly tension between Richard and Emily throughout their interactions, but it isn't really revealed what's going on until Roy and Lorelai leave and come to the conclusion that Emily is not sleeping at the house with Richard. At the end of the episode, Jason and Lorelai break up because Jason announces that he's suing Richard. And what's crazy to me is that Lorelai gives up her relationship out of loyalty to her family, but in the end, it's not even looked at as a moment where Lorelai was actually trying to show that she cares about them, or that Lorelai just cares about them in general. During the first Friday night dinner, Richard and Emily are being passive aggressive with each other at the table. Lorelai invites them to come stay at the end for the test run that she's having. They continue to bicker, and then the season ends with Emily finally confessing to Lorelai that her and Richard are separated. So that wraps up season 4. It took us a minute to get through this season, but I am really glad that now we're going to go into season 5, where I think this is the next upcoming season where things get even worse with Emily and the manipulation. I love that these episodes allowed us to talk about people pleasing, because I genuinely feel like it's something a lot of people are victims to, and because I have personal experience with it, like, I thought it would be interesting to talk about. I think it would also be helpful in the comments if some of you shared ways that you overcame your own people pleasing tendencies, because I'm almost sure that someone is watching this video and kind of wondering how to overcome it, how to stop being a people pleaser. And I think one of the points I was trying to make is that people pleasing is not beneficial, and I think one of the reasons people cling to it so hard as a protective measure is because they think that it's working. There are a plethora of reasons why people choose to people please. I don't think it's always manipulative. I think there are some people that just want to avoid drama, and they're just not confrontational. In my opinion, girls especially are taught to people please from such a young age because you're not allowed to be like too loud. You don't want to be a bother. You don't want to be someone that takes up space. You're taught to be more agreeable and quieter. But to me, it seems that that benefits society more than it benefits you. Saying no seems like the hardest thing, especially when you first get started, because you're always worried about what's going to happen on the other side. But sometimes people just need to hear no. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.